Welcome to everybody. I'm Jeff Gedman with American Purpose. And gosh, what a group. And Nino and Anders Aslan and David Kramer and too many fabulous people to mention and welcome by name. Sorry about that, but I'm delighted to welcome you and to scene set and introduce the hour program we have for you today. If I may ask, if you're in a position to do so, could you turn your cameras on just for a moment to say hi so that we can see all of you? People are waving. It's nice to wave, and good to see you all. It's someday in person, someplace in person. So thank you all for that. And if you need to switch your camera off for the duration for whatever reason, obviously feel welcome to do so. So again, I'm Jeff Gedman with American Purpose. We have an hour conversation. We have just published with American Purpose an interview with former Estonian President Toomas Ilves, our guest of honor today. Michelle, my colleague, managing editor, or one of our other colleagues will put that in chat. If it's not there already, look for it in a moment and read that if you have a chance, please. The introductions go like this. Melinda Haring has kindly agreed to moderate and co-host. Melinda, great to see you, and thank you for doing this with us, you and the Atlantic Council. I think everybody on this call knows Melinda, but Melinda is an expert on Eastern Europe. She is one of the clearest, most compelling voices on Ukraine. She writes, she hosts, she moderates, organizes, and at the Atlantic Council, she's deputy director of the Eurasia Center. So Melinda, thank you and welcome. Glad you're here. And you'll have the microphone in just a moment to start asking questions and take us through this next 55, 56 minutes. And Toomas Ilves, Tom Ilves from Estonia today. I think most of you know him personally. What a voice he is. He hails originally in some life from New Jersey. We were just getting a little bit of a experience of his New Jersey accent. You'll hear in moments which accent he chooses to work in today, but he has been so important on issues that we care about over the years, having gone back after the Cold War to Estonia to be involved in politics, chair of the Social Democratic Party, foreign minister, president for a number of years, and also a writer, and also a public intellectual. And I would be remiss if I didn't add, Tom, having started his career years and years ago with a group, I see Arch Puddington there, with a group called Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. How can I not mention that? So Tom, welcome to you. You have a great group of friends and colleagues and an audience today. And Melinda, it's over to you. We're going to have about 30 minutes of you in conversation with President Ilves. And then the latter half to 1 p.m. Eastern will be open floor for discussion. Melinda, floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. And congratulations, President Ilves. This is a really important essay. There's so much in it. I can't wait to dig in and start asking you questions. Before I do, though, I want to say thank you to Jeff for hosting this discussion, and what a fabulous publication you've put together in such a few short months. I think American Purpose is producing some of the most interesting essays out there. So congratulations to you and your team. It's a must read for me every day. So President Ilves, again, I have so many questions for you. This is a really, really rich essay. Let's jump in. Susan Glasser also had a superb column yesterday, and there's a lot of similarity between yours and Susan. And she interviews Russian opposition leader Vladimir Milov, who says the West doesn't have a systematic approach to Russia. She says, Vladimir Milov says, we slap them on the wrists when they do bad things, and it's one-off. What would a real Russia policy look like?
Well, I think we need to make clear to Russia that this current sort of counter-enlightenment policy that they are engaged in pushing back on liberal democracy is something that we will not tolerate. We have taken liberal democracy for granted for so long and assumed that, well, it's just a great thing and other people will just pick it up. When in fact, I would argue for since perhaps 2007 with the Munich speech by Putin, or later on, at least certainly after 2014, that at least Russia and later on China as well have really picked up on taking down liberal democracy. The idea of free and fair elections, rule of law, most importantly, fundamental rights and freedoms is something that is scoffed at, ignored, glossed over, and and we don't understand how fundamental those pillars are to our own lives and success. And when we see our people looking past those things, I think we began to see it initially in Europe, in the with Berlusconi, with Gerhard Schröder, in mainstream parties already. Not to mention the peripheral parties that have been there all along, espousing these values and trying to pull down liberal democracy. But then we've seen basically since 2016 the same attitude massively shared in the United States, and really as the as the primary bastion or bulwark of liberal democracy in the West since 1945. If the bastion starts crumbling, then we're all in trouble. We meaning we in Europe more so. At least, but it's, I mean, that kind of, the attack has been successful. We have seen the nature of politics change dramatically, is most obviously in the United States, since the audience is mainly from the United States, but you see it elsewhere. And I think we need to come together and say, look, this is a problem. This is something we really have to deal with. And it's, I remember saying 5 or 6 years ago that, well, maybe we're in about 1947, 48 right now, when the West realized, look, we better start pushing back on what the Soviet Union is doing. And then after that came an amazing series of actions. I mean, we had the Berlin airlift, we had the Marshall Plan, we had NATO, and we had the Bretton Woods institutions really taking off and playing a major role. And then we had the US, which helping along with the creation of the European steel and coal community. All of those things happened in this period of, say, 47, 48, when it started. And by the early to middle 50s, we had altered and really strengthened liberal democratic institutions transatlantically. Right now, we're all adrift, and we're not together. And what we need really is to come together and say, look, this is all very, I mean, all of this, we cannot continue in the way we have been continuing. And it's not a matter of just calling up Macron or Merkel and saying, look, you know, maybe you shouldn't do Nord Stream 2, but developing a fundamental understanding that we are under attack and that it is working.
President Ilves, who's going to bring us together? Is Biden the right man for the job? There's some indications that the picture may not be as rosy as some of us had expected. Over the weekend, Axios published a story suggesting that Matt Rojansky will be named the Russia director for the National Security Council. Some of us have heard today that rumor has been shot down and the nomination's on ice, but we can lay aside that specific nomination. But it's the type that's being recommended. If someone like him is appointed for this top job at the National Security Council, what does that suggest about the contours of Biden's policy? Does it suggest that he's less hardline than many of us thought, and that he might want to move beyond Russia and not see the threat the way that you've described, and will be more focused on China and the pandemic? Is that how you read that, or do you see it a different way?
Well, first of all, I've never seen Joe Biden as hardline. I've known him for many years. I mean, as well as a minor country in Eastern Europe, but I've interacted with him a lot. And first of all, he's never struck me as being hardline, but he's the most transatlantic president that the United States has had since George Herbert Walker Bush. that's quite a long stretch. And I am not, I mean, individual appointments I'm not sure that they're that important. I think, however, that that this realism that we have been occasionally seen, but which is far worse in all other countries that I've seen, sort of the transactionalism that reached its apogee in the previous administration of the United States, but has been going along all along in Italy, in France, and in Germany, that the time for transactionalist foreign policy is over, or should be over. That we really need to understand that the pillars of our prosperity and our happiness in the West are under attack and are being subverted.
Great, thank you. In your essay, you have an interesting section about soft power, and you say that Russia has no soft power, and you helpfully point out that no one is moving to Russia to work there, and it's quite the opposite. Does the West still have any soft power, though? And what advice do you have for Biden to increase U.S. soft power? Is the COVID vaccine a place where we should consider using that for soft power purposes?
Yeah, I don't think the United States' soft power has gone anywhere. If anything, I would argue that the soft power of the West is actually doing better, because there are countries adding to it. Just to do a little promotion for my own country, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a survey of quality of life around the world, and my country was number 11. I think the United States was somewhere in the low 20s. So so the soft power, and we see this in immigration and so forth, that the soft power of the West has not declined. What the problem is that you have these countries that would very much, you have these regimes that very much would like to enjoy the benefits of a liberal democracy, and in fact, most concretely, where they want to enjoy the benefits of liberal democracy comes in money laundering. They don't keep money at home. Why? Because it might be taken away. And why do they launder money? So they can keep their ill-gained finances in countries with rule of law, where no one can come and take it away from you, which is something that can always happen in Russia. It can just as well happen in China and in all of the other kind of places that don't have rule of law. So they like rule of law. It's just that they don't want the other stuff in their country.
Great. That sounds right. So Biden says that China is the biggest national security threat to the United States, and you have a section about China in your essay as well. But isn't Russia more dangerous in the short term?
I think, yeah, we're looking at two different time frames. I mean, it's almost a cliche, sort of Russia's weather, China's climate change. I mean, what is whoever it was among the threat assessment that was put out last week in the United States, I mean, basically sees Russia, I think rightly so, as a nuisance. I mean, it is a country that the term I think was disruptive power.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically your best claim to fame. I mean, someone will say, "Oh, but they have so many nukes." Yeah, but I mean, the nuclear option is something, at least at a mass death level, is not in the cards. But to be able to disrupt countries, to disrupt policies, that they're excellent at. I also don't think that. I mean, if China got its chip off its shoulder and realized that there really isn't too much benefit either to persecuting Uyghurs or invading Taiwan, that maybe, I mean, then in fact, I think the US and the Chinese have far fewer problems. What we're seeing, I think, in China is a terrible brittleness, that everything upsets them. Anything that questions the model of that, but this is not the key to a vibrant, successful society, when in fact, soon as someone has a slightly different idea, and you go and imprison them. I mean, this is not the way to go, I would argue.
Yep, for sure. Let me ask one more question on China. You have a section in your paper, and you say that there's an argument that we need the Russians to fight the Chinese, and you say this is Macron's argument. Why is that argument nonsense?
Well, I mean, it's some kind of, I mean, I don't know what it's based on. I guess some kind of like reductionist Huntingtonianism. They're Christian, therefore we can fight with them against the yellow peril. I mean, that, I mean, it just is so, it makes no, it's something from the 19th century. I mean, the shared fundamental, I mean, sort of low level Christianity values, the fact that there's Jesus Christ in there. Actually, if you look at doctrine and dogma, I mean, you can make a far better case saying that, well, actually, it really has to do with the Nicene Creed and then go on to sort of, you know, personal responsibility as embodied in Lutheranism. I mean, you can just, and then you can go on to even greater factionalism in Christianity. I mean, I cannot see an argument in which as calculating a regime as you have in Russia today, thinking, oh, we believe in the same God, let's go. And I mean, what? I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, you can actually say that, yes, well, you have Western civilization consists of the Adamic God shared by Islam, Judaism, and all of Christianity. I mean, I don't think people, especially in the West, really think in religious categories. I don't know how much Emmanuel Macron goes to church, but at least in general in Europe, it has become a rather secular society, and you're not going to mobilize anyone in Europe saying, oh, let's, you know, onward Christian soldiers. It's not going to work. So I don't understand that argument, but it is basically kind of like high school Huntingtonianism.
Okay, yeah, and also you may have seen that Pew just did a polling on church going in America, and the numbers have fallen to very low, below 50%. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on. Let's move now to Ukraine. You have a large section on Ukraine in your paper, and it's absolutely excellent. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about that. So President Biden recently pledged unwavering support for Ukraine, but we know that the United States won't go to war on Ukraine's behalf if it comes to that. Language matters. Do you buy the argument that the Russians are trying to test Biden with a massive increase of troops on the Ukrainian border? How do you read the situation as it is, sir?
You know, it's anybody's guess when it comes to Vladimir Putin's intentions. I mean, he certainly managed to intimidate a hell of a lot of people with all of these videos of massive sort of trains full of tanks and roads full of armor and I mean, classically all the things you do if you're going to invade someone. Now, I'm not sure. I mean, I could turn into an idiot in 27 hours, you know, if I'm completely wrong. But I would say it's probably a bad idea to go and invade at this point because you don't know what Biden will do. And I think that Biden at this point will be forced to do something, and I'm something serious. You know, Putin's Putin's regime is also brittle, and now I'm not sure how much the people in his beyond his most immediate consiglieri around him are really going to be thrilled if you turn off SWIFT. I mean, I don't know. I have a feeling that it would kind of irk a lot of people that they would no longer be able to transfer funds. I understand they've been working on an alternative to that, but it's also probably not there yet. I mean, do Russians really want to be completely cut off from Europe, which I suspect will be one of the products or results of an invasion? Because if nothing else, Putin can Joe Biden, President Biden can really bear down on West European countries that look, okay, it's choose us or them. Who do you trade with more? And basically this is time for action, and we have to defend the fundamental principles upon which the post-World War II order is based on. You do not invade other countries. And it's a lesson that I think that the governments of Germany and France and other accommodationist governments in Europe have kind of forgotten. Everyone takes it for granted that, yes, oh, this is like this, yeah, we live in peace and this is what it's all about, that nothing's going to change. Well, things can change very fast, I can tell you, and you can go from having a wonderful kind of peaceful existence in Europe to one that is very ugly very quickly. And so
let me stop you there, though. Is turning off SWIFT really something you think that policy makers are willing to consider? Every time I hear people talk about cutting off access to the SWIFT system, people at the State Department's eyes become saucers. You know, people think this is sort of a crazy option in the United States. What options would you suggest if Putin does invade that would get Vladimir Putin's attention?
Well, I would certainly freeze all visas for a while. I mean, that will get some attention. The sanctions regime so far have not really changed behavior there. I mean, there are many other things. I mean, really do go after all of the laundered money that's here. I mean, the UK has a law that I don't know how much it's enforced, but basically, if you come from certain kinds of regimes, you have to show how you legitimately got the money with which you bought your mansion or villa. I don't know how much they've applied that kind of selectively, but in any case, I mean, there are many ways to make a country that still has an economy the size of Italy hurt. And that's, I mean, if you think of any other country with the size of Russia's economy, no one would really think much about sort of, oh, we can do this, we can do that. I mean, why do we feel that when it comes to Russia, we can't do that?
President Ilves, you have a really excellent section on pressuring the Ukrainians using a combination of carrots and sticks. That approach has been tried over and over again since 2014, and there has been some progress. What if carrots and sticks, what if the carrot isn't going to work anymore? Do you think Zelensky is a real reformer when it comes to ending corruption in Ukraine?
Well, more than his predecessors. So, I mean, so he's doing, I mean, so taking action on some of the oligarchs there is good. I think that you can bring more pressure to bear on the government there. I think this is, I mean, basically, you know, Ukraine has not been at a focus of attention the way I think it should have been. Yeah, I'm sort of Brzezinskian in this regard, sort of, you know, Russia without, with Ukraine, Russia's an empire, and without it, it's just a big, poor country. And I think that we ought to do far more for Ukraine and really think in the categories of the Marshall Plan, think in the categories of some kind of creative solution to get them into NATO. I just threw out an idea last week after I read that President Biden is appointing someone to deal with Nord Stream 2. I don't know how successful that'll be, but I said, hey, go to the Germans. I mean, I was there at Bucharest when, you know, when Angela Merkel was like, no membership action plan for Ukraine. No. And at the same time, Lech Kaczynski was jumping up and down, furious. And then finally, President George Bush said, okay, well, we'll say this, we'll take them in, but we won't mention map. Well, maybe say, okay, what's more important to you, Bundeskanzlerin? Do you want to have Nord Stream 2, or do you want to have, or you want to keep Ukraine out of NATO? I mean, there are creative and bold solutions that you can try. And I think that the United States can actually flex a little muscle on these issues, but really make Ukraine its primary European focus, just as clearly, I mean, Asia right now is the world focus of the United States in terms of policy. But when it comes to Europe, say, okay, the real issue that we see that where we can have a transformative effect, one that will be as long lasting as the 1989-91 revolutions had in expanding the zone of peace, freedom, and stability, the sort of making Europe whole and free. Well, it's not quite whole and free yet. And there's that whole area there that has been largely ignored. I mean, in part, not because the West was so bad, but because, you know, basically after 89, 91, it's like everyone had a chance. Some countries decided to push hard. I know this, my own country, really pushed hard because we thought that this was the window of opportunity would close, which it did. And then there were countries that chose to sort of take an easier route and not do things. Well, I think that here it is 30 years later. Well, why we have another round. Let's give Ukraine and other countries such as Georgia that have been struggling and basically give them a bigger carrot, but also threaten them with removal of any carrots. You know, it's your choice. I think that the backsliding in democracy in Georgia these days with jailing opposition leaders. I mean, how is that different from what Yanukovych did with Yulia Tymoshenko? It's not. So I think that rather than being passive, I think that the United States, together with Europe, should be taking a far more forceful approach to Ukraine. Let's think out of the box. Let's think differently. Let's not let it passively slide into some kind of bigger mess.
Absolutely. Sir, where are you on Belarus? Do you think that it's game over and Lukashenko has managed to prevail? There haven't been enough splits in the security services, or do you see the situation differently there?
Well, I mean, let's face it, Lukashenko is not sustainable. You know, so he's not, I mean, he's not sustainable. Okay, so we have a lull right now. Summer's coming. Today's the first warm day in this part of the world since basically October. I think he should be nervous. I mean, there are all kinds of things that Belarusians can do and will do, and I think we have certainly seen a change in a nation that was considered passively accepting of the same Putin-esque line. Okay, well, economically it's okay, so we'll agree to his behavior and his repressions. They're no longer willing to do that. I mean, Belarus and Ukraine are two countries that have had fundamental changes in the consciousness and awareness of democracy and human rights that before I was even this kind of Orientalist attitude in the West. Well, those people like living in those kinds of situations. Well, they don't. They do not like to live in oppressive societies. And so we see that the things are changing, and if there will be setbacks. In my own country, we had basically, well, 83 years of going back and forth. I mean, things would rise up, and then there would be repressions, and then it would calm down, then would rise up again. You know, I don't want to be totally Hegelian, but I do nonetheless think that I do fall in line with Frank Fukuyama, and I think he's right. And just the unfortunate interpretation of the word end in his book 30 years ago. But other than that, I think he's right. I mean, people want to live free. That's kind of basic.
Absolutely. Let me ask you one more point, and then I'm going to bring in our distinguished audience. You have a section at the end of your essay about Estonia, and you talk about the COVID response, but you also have this section about something remarkable. Estonia just had its 6th unicorn, and you only have 1.3 million people. If you take off your presidential hat for a minute and you put on your analyst hat, what advice would you give to small Eastern European countries that want great FDI and more unicorns? What practical things could they do?
Well, actually, I think I spent more of my life developing digital Estonia than I have being either president or anything else. I mean, that was initially what I started promoting in Estonia in the early 90s. Certainly I mean, the first thing I started pushing in 1994, 95, and was enacted by 96, thanks to a very good government at the time that listened to me, but was that you have just put all schools online, give every school a bunch of computers. The kids will figure it out themselves. I mean, don't even worry about teaching them. I mean, do teach them, obviously. Which was paid off, because at the end of my term, I went around visiting various startups, and I finally said, so how'd you get started? And all these people in their like late 20s, early 30s said, oh, I was a kid in your program back in the 90s, right? So then we ended up with a large group of people who had been digitally active since the middle 90s, they're really digitally native. That's the first thing, and just let them create, and it happens. I don't know. I think governments need to be accepting of digital solutions. We were blessed for a long, long time by different governments that actually listened to their tech people, or not in the government, but people who had tech ideas. And that's what led to the digitization of our governance and public services already in 2000, 2001, because the government said, well, the thing is, the governments were hungry. They wanted to move ahead. They wanted to get out of this Soviet miasma that we had been that we're trying to like climb out of. And this worked. So I would say, well, and get people in government who understand tech. That would be a good idea too.
That's a great recommendation. Okay, first question is from Bogdan Nihilo in Kyiv, Ukraine. Hello, Bogdan. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Unmuting. Hi, Tom. It's been a long time since we had a beer together in Munich in those good old days on the front lines. Anyway, look, you say, we may be back to 1947, 48, the Cold War, Berlin airlift and all that. I just want to go back a little bit in history and ask you, are we not seeing in effect in Eastern and Central Europe unfinished business from the 19th century? It may be 1848 still for some of the peoples there. 19th century, Ukraine today seems to be playing the role of Poland vis-a-vis Russia, St. Petersburg, as a kind of bulwark, and we will not let them go. Then we have the reconfiguration right now in Europe. Britain has left, Brexit. Germany and France seem to be, the two heavyweights. But what is happening in Eastern and Central Europe? Is there a reconfiguration taking place there as you feel that Germany, or even in tandem with France, shouldn't be speaking for the rest of Europe, and there should be more of an effort, I'm finishing, to sort of complete the Europeanization of the continent, bringing it to where Eurasia begins and Europe ends, meaning Belarus and Ukraine, if I'm clear.
Bringing the countries from Estonia down to from the Baltic Sea down to the Adriatic and Black Sea is something that is mentally still an unfinished project. Even though we may be quite successful, we're not yet a part of the consciousness of Europe among many people, among policymakers. That Macron came out with his idea without ever consulting the East Europeans. And okay, you can ignore little Estonia, but he didn't consult with anybody. And just went over our heads. Is a mentality that should have been long gone, but it is not. It's very much there. there is this attitude that, oh, those East Europeans are this, that, or the other, which all of us have run into, all of us from Eastern Europe, of course. You know, kind of the wogs over there. Well, we have to deal with them. They take our money. I mean, all of this stuff. You know, this is one reason why we push all the time in Estonia on things such as corruption, because at this point we're less corrupt than a majority of EU countries. EU countries, not, you know, that's so we can point this out and say, look, we're not, you know, you don't treat us this way. But it's a long battle, and it's actually something that has lasted. I mean, if you read Larry Wolff wrote a book called The Enlightenment Idea of Eastern Europe, which is a superb historical look at how the idea of Eastern Europe being backward and miserable developed, which was that back in the 18th century, Diderot and Voltaire could not write about how backward the clergy and the monarchy of France were. So they took East European or travelogues of Frenchmen visiting Moldova and wherever they went, I don't know, and then said, see how bad this is. But I mean, it did have this permanent sort of effect of painting a picture of Eastern Europe as being somehow backward. Something that, I mean, yeah, when in 2008, I flew down to Georgia when the Russians invaded, and then when the Finns asked their president why she didn't go, she said, "Well, you know, we're not Eastern Europe, we're Northern Europe." It's like, you know, Finland was a Baltic state in the 20s and 30s. It was only after the Soviet period that we remained Baltic and it became Nordic. You know, it was like, I mean, that kind of attitude is so prevalent in so much of Western Europe today. It is disappearing. I mean, I'm saying it is going away, but nonetheless, it's there. And so, and I think that the idea of this vision of what we're going to do with, you know, with Russia against China, and you never talk to the people who actually have the empirical basis of knowledge. I mean, they have actually seen it. You know, this is, yeah. I'll just one more example. And when I was ambassador in the United States in the early '90s, I went to see the then Finnish ambassador, and he said, Toomas, put his arm around me. He said, "We have so much experience with the Russians." And I looked at him and said, "Jukka, yeah, we Estonians, we don't know anything about them." That attitude is rather prevalent.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great point, though. We need to do more writing and more books to try to change the perception of Eastern Europe, for sure. Next question is to Priscilla. Priscilla has a question for you on Navalny. If you could unmute, go ahead, Priscilla.
Hi. My question about Navalny, the Navalny situation. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Is whether this is, I mean, we would agree it's awful, it's terrible, it doesn't look good, but is it going to be will it affect any kind of change, either inside Russia or in the way outside entities are dealing with it? Will it be another Magnitsky story, which is a horrible story, and, you know, and laws have been put into place and there are sanctions from time to time and so forth. But it seems to me that this is looking less and less as though it's going to be a real watershed or change either inside or outside Russia.
Thanks a lot. And can I tack on too, do you think Navalny is part of the reason that the Russians are increasing their tensions? Are they trying to distract from the domestic situation? If I can add that on.
Well, that actually puts it in an interesting light, because if you think that the Russians are bringing in 50,000 troops and all of this armor to distract from what seems to be where like Navalny's fate is unfortunately headed, then that shows how much they are afraid of him, and that so they might. And I do not see sort of getting any kind of jingoistic boost from attacking Ukraine that you saw in 2014. So, I mean, I don't know, that's not an answer, but I think that in fact, maybe in the West, Navalny these days has less of a role. I mean, there was, than he does in Russia. And if you look at the response to his arrest upon returning, I mean, I think especially the fact that he went back is something that raises his stature in the eyes, even of people who otherwise maybe don't care that much, because instead of this, everything is for sale. This is a, this is all, CIA buys you. What's the difference if the FSB buys you? I mean, that was such a strong moral stance. I mean, this is a moral stance of the kind that really makes it very hard for the Putin regime. And if something bad befalls him, I think there will be huge anger and I mean, given how hard it is anyway to justify what Russia's doing in Ukraine today, I just see that as a dead end if something really bad happens to Navalny.
Great. And if you buy the distraction theory, there's a couple of other things domestically in Russia, that bolster that argument. You also have parliamentary elections in the fall. You have Putin's declining popularity. You have a terrible economy, and you have the COVID response. So I don't know if I would say it's a slam dunk, but the argument looks pretty convincing.
Well, I mean, the COVID thing, I think, is also serious. I mean, there was the piece yesterday that actually the death rate in Russia is worse than in the United States. I mean, if you have 400,000 people dying in a country that's less than half the size of the United States, you've done a real bad job. And I hope Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and Svoboda are all pointing this out.
I'm sure they are. And next up is Ambassador Adrian Basor. It's wonderful to see you. If you could go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Melinda. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Good. President Ilves, thank you very much for your very rich and broad overview of the whole European situation. I want to focus just on Ukraine, and more specifically, I certainly agree with you as Ukraine as the linchpin, the way you've described it in the whole equation of democracy and where Europe ends or begins. Very specifically, however, and I know it's a little bit, it's a complicated question, though it sounds simple. Would you advise that the Biden administration put more military backing behind Ukraine if the Russians begin to show more aggressive action, not just stockpiling troops and weaponry, but actually begin to increase the range of hostilities and begin to probe for a possible invasion? What kind of support by the United States beyond the sanctions that you mentioned? Militarily, what would you recommend?
Well, I think sharing military intelligence to a is a real big thing. I mean, and I don't know what is being done, but certainly I think it's key to have to share the US's amazing SIGINT and satellite intelligence with the Ukrainians, so they have a better idea of what's going on to sort of reduce some of the fog of Vladimir Putin's war. And then we also have advisors. I mean, this is a role that can, long before you bring US troops into combat, in Vietnam, you had years of advisors, but I mean, bring in really a lot of people who can assist the Ukrainians, give them advice on how to do the fighting. Not that, the Ukrainians are probably some of the best warriors around these days, because they've been in war for the past 7 years. And so they are battle hardened, but certainly in terms of modern war fighting and in terms of modern tactics, they might need some help. Certainly drones are another area where, even just for intelligence gathering, all of these things are short of sort of having boots on the ground, as it were. So I would go in that direction, help them in all ways possible. We already, Donald Trump did give them some lethal aid, remove the restriction that the Tomahawks need to remain in Western Ukraine, because they're not invading Western Ukraine. I mean, the tanks are not going to be coming to Western Ukraine.
Wonderful,
Thank
thank you. We have a question from David Kramer and then Lilia Shevtsova and then Anders Oslin. Go ahead, David.
Tom, good to see you. Thanks, Melinda. Just actually a quick clarification. I was on an email chat over the weekend, and there actually are not restrictions on where the javelins can be deployed. The Ukrainians can actually deploy them close to the front line. So I think there may have been when they were first provided to Ukraine, but they don't exist anymore.
Awesome, thank you for that clarification. That's important. Thanks, David.
Sure. On the two questions I had, Tom, were quick. Can you imagine anything Putin would do that would trigger sanctions on him personally, in which the EU and the US would agree? And the second question brings you back to your old roots of RFERL, which is going to get kicked out of Russia. It's not a matter of if, it's when. What should we, the West, collectively do in response to that? Thanks.
Okay, well, on Putin, I fear that the line that you get, oh, it's better to talk, is, I mean, we've been hearing that for 20 years, but it's going to be, but I mean, he's already been excluded from the G8 to reduce it to G7. I would just not pay attention to him. I mean, he's actually causing these problems to get some attention, because why the hell would why would Germany deal with a country otherwise to which it exports less than to the Czech Republic with 10 million people in it? I mean, it's sort of taken down a notch. I mean, it is not that important a country except for the damage it can do, but that does not, but the ability to cause damage does not immediately incur respect on you. Rather, right, you're a jerk. You're causing us problems. We are not going to start treating you like, yes, Mr. President, just because you're a nuisance to us. It's the New Jersey approach, you know. What was the other question?
RFERL, please.
Well, there are so many different opportunities that, I mean, I would, you know, Russian domestic web-based media is so vibrant, and so much of what comes that Russians watch comes from, I mean, you take Dodge, there's some, I mean, there are all these smaller places. Give them support, give them television cameras, give them hosting on YouTube. I mean, there are all these things you can do to make the production of free, unfettered, uncensored journalism in the Russian internet space possible. Now, I mean, you can say, okay, well, Putin will go that far, he'll just shut down the internet, so it'll be like China version 2.0. I'm not so sure the people of Russia really, having enjoyed internet access to the West for 25 years, are really going to be thrilled to see, you know, sort of just the Russian propaganda with Solovyov anymore.
Excellent point, excellent point. Bogdan Nihilo is suggesting a radio-free Russia based in Kyiv, which actually makes quite a bit of sense. Lilia Shevtsova, your turn, please. Oh, you need to unmute, please. Sorry, you're still muted.
It's the mic.
Okay, thank you, Melinda. Mr. President.
Daragaya.
You know that you are such dear Dorogoy for us. And you see here that there are quite a few members of your fan club, you know. And I have to tell you that we miss your Leonard Mary so much. It was such a wonderful time. And I hope, well, you'll think about some repetition. And so here's the question, otherwise Melinda will take me off. I assume that you're writing about that in your memoirs. So the question is, what are the major cliches and fallacies and stupidities? You started already to respond to this question. Stupidities on the part of the West regarding the global challenges, international relations,
life trajectory, our part of the world that need to be reassessed, damped. And what is your view? Maybe the key from your experience as an analyst, as political leader, as the president, and as the fun guy.
Well, I mean, people don't understand what it is that, I mean, how precious and how fragile liberal democracy is. And least of all, we call them broilers, but the apparatchiks that have risen to power through party systems, be it through the CDU or the Parti Socialist. I mean, people who have been, who have spent their entire lives as political apparatchiks. And they're very good at what they do, and they do help make the individual countries successful because they know how to, you know, if you're an anarch and you know how to do this stuff, you can make France better. And, you know, if you've been in, North Rhine-Westphalen's apparat for your entire life, you know what to do in Germany's richest land. But there's not much, I mean, if you look at the kind of the willingness to sell things out, it doesn't seem to be much of an awareness of the fundamental values that the West is based upon, where in fact, East Europeans generally, if we take aside Mr. Orban, really do have a fundamental understanding of what freedom is. And that freedom is something that, as Ronald Reagan said, it doesn't get passed on in the blood, and every generation has to go and get it back. And we're living through the proof of that, of Reagan's statement, which is, here we are, it's more than a generation. And even in my own country, you know, for 20 years, it was long, hard work. And then we got what we wanted, and we're in NATO, and we're in the European Union, and we're all blah, blah, blah. And then you get these apparatchiks who basically take it for granted because they're reaping the benefits of all of the work that was done in the generation beforehand, and taking strictly a transactional approach to issues. I mean, this, you know, principle goes away. Fortunately, we have a new government, but the penultimate government we had actually wasn't really even supporting Belarus. Yeah, I mean, it's like, wait a minute. I mean, we were the country that always stood and made a case for countries that are oppressed, that are invaded. You know, I fly down with Lech Kaczynski to Tbilisi. I mean, that's what we do. And now we have this right, you know, around the corner from us, and there's no, we don't want to deal with that. So, I mean, it's the apparatchikization of Europe, not that the US is much better.
Thank you, Lilia. That's a brilliant question. I think we could have an entire discussion about it. Next over to Anders Oslin, who's, I think, going to ask a tough question. Go ahead, Anders.
He's such a softie.
Tom, great to see you, and excellent conversation you and Melinda have. I have an easy question for you. How do you think that Putin will end? Will it be like Russia-Japanese war, for example, with Ukraine 1905? Will it be February 1917? Or will it be August 91? Or will it be just dying in bed?
Okay, what's an easy question? That's not an easy question. Go ahead, President Ilves.
Yeah, I think there was a great funny movie that is banned in Russia called The Death of Stalin. I think it will be much closer to a, some kind of, I mean, it need not be sort of a long, slow death. Clearly, he is very, I mean, he's sort of at a Howard Hughes level of paranoia about germs. You have to go into the president of Armenia had to quarantine for 10 days to go see him. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that, the richest people in the world allow themselves these kinds of quirks, and he seems to have one. But it may not necessarily be COVID. I mean, as I said, I mean, we're the same age, more or less. I mean, he's a year older than I am, and one of these days I could, I look at my friends are dropping off. I could like pop off tonight. I mean, I don't know, one of these days he might just be dead. And then they'll go, oh no, what do we do now? And who gets the mansion? Who gets the mansion? So I think that, you know, I mean, really is still a bunch of dogs fighting under the carpets, as Churchill said. And then we'll see, you know, and I think actually it'll end, I mean, another solution might be sort of machine AK-47 sort of ricocheting in the halls of the Kremlin. I don't know. I just the other day, I agreed with that brilliant analyst, Claire Berlinski, that we both have the same idea, that the best way to understand Putin's Russia is to reread Mario Puzo's The Godfather. Forget all these other theories. You know, I mean, that is how it works. And so we've both now reordered the book because we read it. I mean, I read it 50 years ago, but we're going to do an essay together on Mario Puzo and Vladimir Putin.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have our homework. Everyone go order a copy of The Godfather, and we will have another discussion. Thank you so much, President Ilves. This was a pleasure. And thank you, Jeff Gedman, for bringing together this incredible community. I don't know how you do it, but you managed to attract some of the most interesting people all over the world. It was really a pleasure to serve as your moderator today. Thank you.
And I miss you all. I miss you all. It's been such a long time. This is murder. I want to go back to the Cold War when we were all hanging out together.
Well, Tom, I have a question for you in that regard. So Melinda, thank you. I second Lilia, who wrote in chat, terrific speaker, wonderful moderator. I'll say, Tom, thank you, President Ilves and Melinda. Tom, I'm going to wrap this up with two very short questions, and thank you for all your experience and intellect and imagination you bring to these things. First question is, do you still hold U.S. citizenship, and have you thought about coming back to America to run for office?
No. I mean, they're two separate notes. No, I have not. I have not had U.S. citizenship. I actually had it for all of 13 years since I naturalized in 1980, and I renounced it in 1993, despite my accent. And I will never run for any office ever again.
Okay, so we'll take that as a yes. And then the final question is, in the interview we published today, it's online, American Purpose, there's an image, a photograph. Could you tell us what it is? For those who've seen it or those who will see it, what's the picture of?
Well, it's a picture from my office where I'm sitting right now of the restored family farm that has been in my family since 1763 at least, but that's the earliest record where there's a continual connection with my forefathers, that it was completely and utterly destroyed by the Sovs. And then I came here, and it's been my cross to bear ever since, because it was my mother's favorite place, and I thought I would get it back for her, and then I did. And then in the intervening Soviet period said, okay, well, that's nice. And then I was stuck with this farm, and I have been restoring it for the past 30 years.
So listen, President Ilves, Tom, thank you, Melinda, everybody on the Zoom. High energy, really smart, and you bring back, if it left at all, our fighting spirit. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Melinda. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Have a great day, great evening.
Thank you so much.
Right.